today we will be going over the new software release for our InstaGate and ThreatWall appliances. Everything I will be showing you today will be on an InstaGate, but everything I will show you also applies to ThreatWall, so it doesn't matter what product you use, you're going to get all the same security features. And periodically through the presentation, I'll be moving from a PowerPoint into a live unit and showing you some of those configurations as well. So with the new release, there are some major updates to this. We've updated our remote authentication. We've simplified it, made it easier, especially when you're under the newer versions of Windows Server. We've also updated that integration so that it applies to email, webmail, user admin, VPN. The InstaGate can fully and the ThreatWall can fully integrate with an AD server now and give you, not just your web filtering, but email, user admin, webmail, and all the VPN capabilities. We've added the ability to map host names to MAC addresses and IP addresses to those MAC addresses, so static DHCP mapping as well as host name mapping. We've added the ability to do IP-based URL filtering. We've also added web proxy auto detection, which is there's a setting in all browsers. Most commonly, you're familiar with it under Internet Explorer. When you go to Internet Options, there's an automatically detect proxy settings checkbox that's enabled by default. We've added a WPAD or web proxy auto detection configuration script that will leverage that default enabled checkbox and allow you to get the proxy settings into the computer without having to use group policy, and we'll go over that a little bit more too. We've updated our reporting. We've added some new reports. We've streamlined it a little bit, and I'm going to show you some of those reports as well, in addition to various bug security and update fixes that have been applied to this new release. So starting right out of the gates, we're going to talk about the remote authentication and the changes that we've made there. Under the old release, or I guess the current release, the remote authentication or Active Directory integration was only for the web proxy authentication. So it was only web-based authentication. However, like I mentioned, we've updated that configuration to add email, webmail, SSL VPN, user admin functionality. So essentially we've added every feature on the unit, with the exception of two functions. The first one is you can't change your remote password. That still has to be changed on the Active Directory server directly. And the last one is PPTP VPN. PPTP VPN uses MS-CHAP v2 protocol to exchange the password, the encrypted password. There's no way to take that encrypted password, hand it off to Active Directory, have it decrypt it, verify it, and then hand it back. So unfortunately that is still not integrated, but with our SSL VPN, hopefully more and more people are moving away from the PPTP and using the SSL VPN support instead. So configuration. On the configuration side, if you're already integrated with Active Directory, there are no additional changes that need to be made. All these new features will just show up, they'll be available, you'll be able to modify, configure them right out of the gates. We've also added the ability to take remote users and add them to local groups. So if you already had local groups set up and you want to continue to use those, you can simply take your remote users and add them in. So here we are on a unit. I'm going to look at that remote authentication. You can see that the authentication itself looks almost identical to what you're used to. There's no major changes here. Again, you can use the IP address or the host name of the Active Directory or Windows Server on your network here. But what has changed is what you are able to do with the groups and users you pull over. So I'm going to go to the Groups menu, and you can see that we're integrating with 3 groups. You can see all the different users that are in those groups. But if I select one of these groups and hit modify, you'll see that we've added remote access VPN permissions, email user permissions, and actually, let me change the proxy settings here to Active Directory. So I'm changing our proxy to use Active Directory based authentication, and I'm going to modify that, or apply that change. It's going to implement those changes on the proxy, restart the proxy. So we'll go back, we'll modify that group, and now you can see that we have web security permissions. So now we can set this group to full access or to block all access, or we could check selected policies and simply apply a web security policy that we've written previously to that group. Now also, under modify and delete users, you'll see that we have local and remote users listed here. So you go through and you look, you have all these local and remote users. Also, you'll notice that my account here is a local and a remote user. Now, what that means is that my account, the account name specifically, so this Colin K, is my Active Directory account, but there was also a local user account already created on this unit so that when the integration updated, it merged the two accounts together. So it's a local and a remote account. The benefit of this actually is that PPTP VPN will work with that one account still, because there is a local account set up on the unit already. But you can see all the remote users are here, so I'm just going to grab one of these remote users. We'll just grab Carl here. I'm going to modify him, and now you can see that I can put him into very specific groups. You can see by default he's in this remote eSoft level 2 group. But if I want to put him into additional groups, maybe remote access users and email users, I can do that and modify a single user. And even though he's a remote user, put him into local groups. And now you can see that he's been added to those local groups in addition to being in that one remote group. And we'll just look at it from one more angle here. So here's the remote Active Directory group that Carl was in, but now he is also right here in the email users group, and right here in the remote access users group. So that updated Active Directory integration and functionality would give you a lot of additional features, a lot of flexibility as far as how you use those users. So, at this point, if you wanted, you could integrate with just the domain users group and then create your groups locally on the InstaGate and move your domain users around into those locally created groups. I still recommend you do that on the Active Directory server side, because then you only have one place where you need to manage those things, but we do give you the flexibility if you want it. So I mentioned that with the Active Directory updates, not only do you have the ability to manage their web access, but now you can also manage email access, webmail access, SSL VPN access. All of those things can be managed. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm just going to show that to you. Actually, before I do, I'm actually going to be using this training username, which you can see right here is in a remote group called eSoft Level 2. But this training username, let me just, whoops. Hold on. I do believe, yes, this training user is also in the eSoft Level 3 group, and you can see that Level 3 group has email access and remote VPN access, so that's SSL VPN. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and log into the user admin piece. So the user admin is where users can go to check their email, log into webmail, log into SSL VPN, set up an autoresponder, but I'm going to use the training account and the password for that account. And I'm going to go ahead and hit login. And now you can see I'm logged into that user admin, and we have different options here on the left. But from here, I can set up an autoresponder for this user or a forwarder. But the SSL VPN is there if I want to install the client, the SSL VPN client for that user. And additionally, the webmail is there. So I'm actually going to move over to the webmail and log into the webmail with that Active Directory user. And there we are, we're logged in. Now, unfortunately, this user doesn't have any email in their mailbox, but here we are logged into the webmail. So hosts and DHCP. So we've added, first of all, the host option is located under the network menu. The host option gives you two main functions. The ability to associate a host name to an IP address for reporting purposes. So in the past, in the web filtering side, we would log the IP address of the computer making the request to the internet. And if you were using authentication, we'd log a username. But if you weren't using authentication, there was no way to tell that a certain IP address belonged to a certain computer because of DHCP and things like that. But now with this functionality, you can associate a host name to a MAC address, and then that host name gets tagged in all of our reporting. So no matter what IP address they get, you're going to see that host name tagged there. So, if you have a user named John, you could put a host name of John's PC or John PC, whatever you want. Whenever that user John browses the internet, no matter what IP address he's on, it will tag his host name to that traffic. It also allows you to do DHCP reservations. This is an InstaGate only feature because the ThreatWall actually doesn't have a DHCP server on it. But on the InstaGate, you can do static DHCP reservations. Additionally, hosts will show up under host groups, which I'm going to show you in just a second. Host groups are used for the IP-based URL filtering. If the InstaGate is acting as your DHCP server, any DHCP leases will show up in the hosts automatically, and then you can choose to modify them, assign them static IP addresses, things like that. Here we are under network, and then we're going to look at hosts, and you can see that we have a handful of hosts set up. You can also see that I have, here I can just show you real quick, let me config. You can see that on my computer, this is my MAC address, so BC30 5 Bravo. So there it is right there. It's that bottom entry, the host setup. I've already assigned my computer a name, so test machine, but I've set it to maintain the dynamic, so it continues to get a dynamic IP address that will change over time. I can actually choose to modify that if I want, and let's say I want to give myself a static. Let's say, I want to always get a certain IP address, whatever it might be. I can then apply it, and the unit will hand out that IP address the next time I pull a DHCP address. That's what host does for you, but also under, I'm going to switch over here for the reporting. This is our demo unit, which has some additional data in the reports. So I'm going to just take a look and show you here that the host names do in fact show up. So anyway, here we are at the web activity screen. We can see that, it's loaded some data here. But you can see in the general log, which is actually the easiest place to look at it, but you can see that not only do we have a username, but we also have a client host name. So this is the host name that I was just showing you under network and hosts. You could go through and, so Amanda PC, Jeff NPC, Jane PC. So you can name all of those computers based on the MAC address, and it'll show up in a reporting automatically. The other thing that we've added is the ability to do URL filtering based on IP address. So previously, the only way for us to distinguish one user from another was to do it based on a login name, whether that was an Active Directory login name or a locally created user on the InstaGate or ThreatWall, their login name. But now we can do it based on IP address. We've added another menu option. This one is also located under network. It's called host groups. It functions in a very similar way to the normal groups configuration that you're already used to with our devices. But you can set up your web proxy however you want. You write your rules, your different filters however you want, and then you can assign those rules to a single IP address, a range of IP addresses. You could pick 5 IP addresses from all over the map if you wanted. It doesn't really matter. They could be on routed networks, IPsec networks, SSL VPN connections. It's completely up to you as an administrator. We give you a lot of flexibility there. There is also an all networks listed. That one is there by default. You can choose to add a web filtering policy to all networks, but keep in mind it'll add it to all IP addresses. So, and it may conflict with any additional or subsequent host group filters you set up. All networks will apply to all IP addresses no matter what else you've set up. So just be careful with that. We added it as a really simple way to deploy a policy to all IP addresses no matter what. So under network and host groups, you can see that there is an all networks, like I mentioned before. I have also added one for test machine, which is this computer that we're looking at, so that I can show you some of these different policy configurations here in a second. But if you go to add a new one, just add a new one, and we'll just call it test. And then you get to pick what IP addresses or ranges of IPs are included. Keep in mind that we're using CIDR-based notation to represent networks. So this one right here, 10.10.54.0/24. That's a class C that goes from 0 to 255. So 10.10.54.0 to 10.10.54.255. There is quite a bit of documentation online regarding CIDR notations. But anyway, you select what networks you want to be included. So let's say we're going to do the local network, and we're going to do the SSL network, SSL VPN network, and let's do this static route as well. So we'll do a route. So this is a network that's on a VLAN behind our unit. And then I'm going to select the web security permissions I want to assign. So maybe I want to maybe I want to assign this main one to them. So I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. And what it's going to do, you can see test. It's assigned the main web security policy for all of these different networks. You just go ahead and then I'm gonna go ahead and remove it as well. But to show you this real-time scenario, well, first of all, let me show you what this one looks like. This test machine group is just for my IP address, so you can see I've added just my computer's IP address over here on the side. And for the first test, we'll do full access. So full access, and you can see here I'll go to facebook.com. And it'll let me get to facebook.com. So there it is. And now I'm going to go back. I'm going to change this. And instead of full, I'm going to do block all. So I'm going to block everything. Okay. And now when I go to facebook.com, you can see I'm getting a block page. And just to hit a couple other URLs here, I also can't get to cnn.com, because everything's being blocked. Now I'm going to go back in and modify this one more time, and instead of a full or a block all policy, I'm going to change it to a selected, and we'll go with this main one. Actually, we'll just use this guy. If I'm not mistaken, this one is allowing access to things like CNN.com, but it should be blocking access to Facebook. There we go. So you can write whatever web security policies you want. And again, the web security policies are written here under web security and policies. And so you can see I have this main policy, which is blocking access to only a couple things, adult content, business services, but you can see social networking is one of the things being blocked. But news, which is CNN.com, is not. But we could easily just go ahead and apply news. So we're now blocking the news category. So if I try to go to CNN.com, it's now going to be blocked. So that main policy has been applied to my single IP address using the IP-based filtering. I have no proxy settings in my browser. It's completely in a transparent mode, and you can go ahead and modify that any way you want. Now, I mentioned that we are in our web proxy currently is in this transparent mode, which means we're going to transparently intercept that data. You don't need proxy settings anywhere. If, however, you want to move to also in transparent mode, it means there's no authentication. So if you want to move to an authenticated setup, you can use authentication and IP-based filtering, but in order to get access to whatever website you're trying to go to, you need to authenticate properly, and you need to be in an IP address that's allowed to go to that site. So your login needs to be able to go there, and your IP address needs to be able to go there before we allow you to go. And we've given you the option to do that, but our recommendation is to use the IP-based filtering in this transparent mode. We added this web proxy auto detection script. This auto detection is something that's built into all browsers now, including I just tested earlier today with the new version of Firefox. Firefox actually now by default uses the system proxy settings instead of its own unique ones, but Chrome, IE, Safari, Firefox, they all use system-based proxy configurations now, which is nice. It makes deployment of proxy config much easier. So when I talk about WPAD, what is that? So WPAD really is just a simplified way to deploy proxy settings using a feature that's enabled in all browsers, which is automatically detect settings. We have the ability to deploy those proxy settings in one of two ways, and then there's a third way which requires group policy, but we can deploy either using DHCP. So if the InstaGate is your DHCP server, you can have it automatically deliver that WPAD or proxy configuration to the client when they pull their DHCP address. Or if you're not using us for DHCP, maybe you're using your Active Directory or your Windows domain controller to do DHCP, we can also deploy the automatic proxy config through DNS. And what we actually do is we actually insert a forwarder into the DNS records on the Microsoft server side that forwards the clients to the right WPAD configuration. This config we've tested on virtually every operating system and browser we can get our hands on. So the Mac OS, Linux, various versions of Windows, various versions of the Mac OS, and including all the browsers I mentioned, all the way up through Opera, Safari, Chrome, Internet Explorer, Firefox, which pretty much covers the gamut at this point. I don't know anyone else is using another browser type in the corporate environment anymore, but So the configuration I'm talking about is actually, I'm going to go into the settings here for Chrome, and specifically the proxy settings, which uses the Microsoft, the Internet Explorer-based proxy settings, but it's this, automatically detect settings. That's it. That's on by default. That's all that needs to be on. Now the great thing about this configuration is the user can come into the office. This setting's enabled. They're going to pull that WPAD or proxy configuration automatically from the network. They're going to get on that network. They're going to be able to browse with the proxy config. But then when they go home with their laptop, there's no proxy config handed out by the network anymore. They're going to be able to go straight out, and they're going to continue to work. So they don't have to change settings in their browser. They don't have to worry about any other configurations. It's just going to work for them as they move from location to location. Now, in order to turn this functionality on, it's actually one really simple checkbox. It's when you turn on the user-based authentication, which on our devices, when you turn on user-based authentication, that's when we start requiring that you hit our proxy. But it's this checkbox right here. You just have to hit that checkbox. You enable it, you hit apply, and now the unit's going to start handing out that WPAD configuration automatically. And that's all you have to do. Configuration is done. So we've also added some updated reporting to our device. We've added some reports that customers requested, and really they're just additional canned reports. A couple of them we've inserted by default, so they're going to show up automatically. Some of them are located under the add reports functions, but so we've added these additional reports, and also we've added the ability to configure your mailed reports. Now, in the past, you were able to turn on daily reporting. So once a day, the unit would generate a report based on whatever you configured, mail it to the system administrators. We now give you the ability to configure reports to be mailed on an hourly, daily, weekly basis, and you can set them to go to whoever you want, and you can set each one of those to include specific reports. So if you have a CTO that wants to get just a weekly report that's a very high-level report that only includes a couple things, you can do that. And then in addition, you can set up a report for yourself that you get once a day that gives you maybe some more details, or once an hour if you're tracking a very specific issue. We've added some additional reports to the threat monitor. We've updated the mailed reports. I'm going to show you the mailed reports first. Mailed reports option is here under alerts and reports. There's a mailed reports option here. And you can create your own. You can see we have some in here by default. This one, I'll just go ahead and modify it. This is the IPS report. It's set to go to a single individual. It's being sent daily, and it's only including the intrusion attempts tab. Now we also have, there are some additional reports in here. So there was an hourly WAN activity report. I'm going to go ahead and modify that one. So this one, all this one does is send WAN activity sent and received, so how much data is passing out of the WAN interface. Also protocol activity, so how much of that data or how much of that traffic was HTTP or HTTPS or POP or SMTP or VPN or whatever the protocol might be. But you can see it's being sent once an hour to the system administrator. But we can create our own. So let's go ahead and we'll add a new one here, and we'll just call this, I don't know, weekly update maybe, and then we're going to have it set to send once a week. And we'll just grab a couple users and throw them over here. There we go. One more is good. And then we can select the reports, and maybe we don't care about the overview. Maybe we don't care about intrusion attempts or network activity, and maybe we just want the top local senders on this side, and on the web activity side, we want, let's see here, top blocked policies. No, top blocked sites. We'll get top blocked sites. And then you hit apply, and it's just going to write that report. So now we have a weekly update report that's going to go to 3 people that includes just 2 reports. And you can tweak that. You can add as many of these profiles as you want. It's completely up to you, whatever your needs or your customers' organizational needs are. we've added some additional reporting into the threat monitor on our devices. Now, on the Web Activity tab, we've actually added a whole slew of reports. They're all located under the Add Reports button. You can see that there's all of these additional reports added. So we've added an activity for all adult materials. Now, adult materials is a top-level category that includes things like mature content, pornographic or nudity related content, weapons or violence related content. So if you want to get just a general overview of that entire top level category that includes those, 6 separate categories in our web filter, you can do that. Same thing with games or social networking. But you can also see, like top games by user. So what users going to the most game sites, what users going to the most adult material sites. You can still create your own custom one, but these are our default reports, and if you just, click one and hit apply, what it's going to do is it's just going to throw it down here at the bottom. So there's adult materials activity. There we go. So now we have adult materials by activity. So now we can see how many occurrences of all the adult materials activity happened in the last 24 hours. So those reports were added. Additionally, under the email activity tab, we've added a new report which actually we inserted by default, and that new report is called Recent Blocked. So it's just a log of all of the blocked emails. That's it. It just shows blocked, doesn't show emails that made it to the user or were whitelisted or anything like that, but just blocked. Whatever it might be, this is just a report based on emails that did not make it through to the mailbox. So those were the additional reports that we added. Please visit support.esoft.com and you can view all of our most recent documentation. Also, the release notes are listed here. If you want to know specifically everything we changed in this release, you can go to support.esoft.com. It's right here in the top right corner, and you can look at the release notes.